It's strange, there are hundreds of parking spaces down here, but it's all completely empty. There are video cameras everywhere, but they don't seem to be turned on. I don't think anybody's watching me. There's lots of sounds going on down here though. You can see that everywhere's got these massive blast doors. During the Soviet era, when tensions were pretty bad between China and Russia, there was the fear that nuclear bombs might get dropped on China, and so a lot of apartment buildings had this requirement that there should be blast doors, underground shelters in apartment buildings, and that's why you see these massive blast doors. You might remember some of the history about that from my video about Beijing Underground City. Be sure to check that out, that's a good video. This looks a little bit ominous. It says diffusion chamber. I'm not even sure what a diffusion chamber is. Let's go and have a look. It's got a big blast door in it. You can see here it says Kai, here it says Guan. Kai means open, Guan means close. So I'm in this pretty sketchy lift. It's got 17 floors on it. Let's go to the top and get a view of the whole complex from the top. I think it's going to be quite nice. There was snow last night. I've just opened a window and you can see this is the view from the top. There's actually a canal which runs alongside and an old river town. There's lots of scuppered boats as well. It's a bit of a strange juxtaposition between the two, I think. To look at this place, you might not realize that there's a housing crisis going on in China. It's not an undersupply of houses, but an oversupply of houses. In China, it's estimated there's about 50 million unoccupied housing units. To put that in perspective, that's about 22% of the entire housing market in China. In China, they build neighborhoods and cities basically from scratch, and a lot of these places are left completely empty. You might be wondering about the motivation for that. Why would the government encourage so much overproduction of housing units? And a lot of that is to do with the way that China calculates its GDP, its gross domestic product. GDP in China is actually calculated differently to the way that it is in the rest of the world. For example, in the West, we calculate GDP by taking the number of houses sold. So once a house is sold, that number gets added towards the GDP of our country. However, in China, which is now the world's second largest economy by GDP, the figure is actually calculated differently. It's calculated by houses built, but not houses sold. Now, if you take this into consideration, China's GDP is not actually the second or even third in the world. It'd be much lower down. If you were to cancel all of these houses, take it all out of the GDP and do it by the number of houses sold, then you'll find that the GDP is much, much lower. I think China is actually quite deceitful about its role in the international economy.